So I'm just, we discussed a lot of theoretical stuff. So how systems are framed, how policies are theorized. So let's just talk a little bit more about maybe practical aspects. Although here I'll also touch a bit on the theoretical aspects as well. I also had a section called Big Issues in Health Systems, in which I thought we could discuss some of the important areas in which health policy and systems research needs to be done. And just to give you a flavor, I had listed three. One was mixed health system syndrome, which is the concept that public and private services exist side by side, compete for services, and very often this particular configuration leads itself to a situation where equity and access gets compromised. And government services often underperform, private services are often too market driven. There's a blurring between public and private, often with private behavior in the public sector and public behavior in the private sector. And there's a wide heterogeneity in services. So this composite is called mixed health system syndrome, and it explains a lot of what goes wrong with our health systems in India. So this is a kind of chronology of different health systems frameworks, which previously they focused on sort of structural aspects. The primary healthcare framework people must be familiar with, Alberta 1979, focused on first contact level of care. 8 programs were included in principal primary healthcare. It was focused on sort of articulated very strongly principles and values: affordability, accessibility, accountability. I don't remember the others, but it was very strongly based on a set of principles. Then, so from that kind of focus on comprehensiveness, there was an unfortunate, maybe a lot of us consider it a slightly unfortunate turn towards selective primary healthcare. In 1982, the UNICEF declaration, and there were some documents and policies prepared as a result of that. And then that kind of led to an extensive period where there was this focus on selective delivery of healthcare. And that is at a global level, but it also trickled down to many countries, and many countries also started following that kind of approach. Then generally, over a period of time, there was sort of a movement towards this idea of basic healthcare packages, still focusing now a bit more broadly on health systems functions rather than selective care. So maybe one can give overtime credit actually for starting some of the systems thinking. Because they did actually, with the economists, they started thinking not just about specific diseases, but also about cross-sector, cross-system issues. So essential clinical services and public health programs. And then you have your World Health Report in 2000, which is actually in your readings, health systems. So finally the building blocks came into their own, and people started thinking about health systems in a more fundamental way. And there are some other examples of key declarations, global declarations and policies which have had a significance for health systems. Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness. So many countries, because while we are all Indians and Keystone is focused only on India, but maybe it's important also to think about other countries which are also facing similar situations to ours, low and middle income countries. Many other countries are more dependent on aid than India is. And actually, external aid is a primary financing mechanism for them. So these kinds of declarations had high significance for them. There was a declaration that country governments should own public health systems and how to increase their sort of ownership and sovereignty. Use of government systems to deliver aid rather than creating separate systems. Health system strengthening, opportunities for global health initiatives in the health system agenda. And finally, in this 2006 document, everybody's business document, which you've got. And then systems thinking, which was produced by Alliance for Health Policy and Systems Research in 2009, a very useful, very elegant document. Worth reading, really encapsulates some of the concepts that we'll be talking about interconnectedness. And this basic principle that interventions succeed or fail, not because of the intervention itself, but because of the system through which they are implemented. That was a kind of a big wake-up call for a lot of people. Now when people talk about Ebola, finally, about Bilaspur, people are finally saying, oh, it's the system that was at fault, not the actual disease program. So this is from Travis, Philida Travis, the interesting researcher from IDS, Institute of Development Studies, Sussex. Effective interventions exist for many priority health problems in lower income countries. Prices are falling and funds are increasing. However, progress towards agreed health goals remains slow. There is increasing consensus that stronger health systems are key to achieving improved health outcomes. So again, this whole idea that no intervention, however well designed, will fail unless the system is robust. And this is an example. This is again from Travis. Example of how, and this is brought from the Alliance. Alliance has produced a reader on health policy and systems research. We'll add that to your Moodle soon. It covers a lot of these areas. This is again from that document. So suppose you're facing a constraint of poorly motivated staff. What would be the disease program response and what would be the health system response? Disease program response may be more narrowly oriented, financial incentives to reward delivery of particular priority services, whereas the health system response may be focused at a wider level. So this is just an example of how a system perspective gives you a different set of solutions than a disease-specific program. So you may want to institute proper performance review, want to create greater role clarity, or you may want to review salary structures. So you see, it's a different lens, it's a different way of looking at how to improve a situation, how to address a constraint. So if your staff are poorly motivated, do you incentivize them or do you do all of these things? Some other examples here. Text is a bit small. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So weak planning and management. Yeah. So you've identified this is the constraint. Okay. In your system is weak planning and management capabilities are weak. So how are you going to address it? At a program level, you can address it through education and training or skills in planning and management. And at a system level, you can also address it through actually doing restructuring. And maybe at changing the system wholesale. Maybe saying you need managers, you don't need providers to provide the service. I'm not saying it's a good or bad policy. I'm just saying that's a kind of thinking that you can have. And frequently these types of thinking is complementary. It's not one is better than the other, but one type of solution is offered by looking at a program perspective. One type of solution is offered by looking at a system perspective. Okay, let's look at this one. Lack of intersectoral action and partnership. This is actually quite typical. This we have seen in our settings. So we identify, okay, planning commission says we don't have intersectoral action. What do we do? Let's create some committees. So creation of special disease-focused cross-sectoral committees and task forces at national level. But on the other hand, a more systemic response to this kind of problem would be building systems of local government that incorporate representatives from health, education, agriculture, and promote accountability of local governance structures to the people. It's obviously a much bigger agenda, something which will take much longer. You need to invest time, invest efforts. But you need to, first of all, you need to start thinking like that. And unfortunately, most policy planners don't have the time to start thinking like that. They think about their program. So they will typically do this. So let's come, actually just building on that exactly, let's come to this. So the idea of vertical, horizontal, and now diagrams. So vertical program focusing on delivery of interventions targeting specific diseases or conditions. We talked about polio, we talked about leprosy, TB. Horizontal programs focus on health systems components with relatively less attention on delivery outcomes. Relatively less. And then, in response to the critique of horizontal approaches saying they are not specific enough, the diagonal approach addressing health system bottlenecks to specific vertical programs while also achieving system-wide benefits. It seems a bit idealistic, but that is what the diagonal approach suggests, that you need to address both the imperatives of vertical approaches as well as the importance of horizontal approaches. And that's again from, say, 2009, I thought it was 2007. So, but it's there in that document. So a little quiz. Who is this? Jeremy Bantam? Okay, great. So Bentham utilitarianism is a kind of philosophical principle on which a lot of public health initiatives, population health initiatives are based. The greatest good for the greatest number of people. The focus on consequences. How do you achieve numbers? Most people should get the most benefits. I think most of us in some way agree with that. Some may not, I don't know, sorry. But there are also problems with this approach. I'm not going into details because of lack of time, just touching on some of these things. And this is an alternative view which came from this individual, John Rawls, although other people have talked about it right from Greek philosophers to Indian philosophers have talked about this in different ways. Justice as fairness. So it's not just about achieving consequences, achieving the right outcomes, but also about providing the right type of opportunities, and opportunities should be presented to people differentially based on the existing advantage that they have in society. The difference principle. Give more benefit to the most disadvantaged members of society. He was a very influential American philosopher, and I don't know if he actually brought about a constitutional amendment, but a lot of major US policies around affirmative action came about as a result of his interventions. Equality of opportunity for all. Can anybody give me another name for this difference principle? Is there another word for it or another phrase for it? A type of equity? What type of equity? Vertical. And most of us operate in public health nowadays, we operate largely on these principles, although there are criticisms of this also. So horizontal equity is a simple kind of equality, providing equal healthcare to those who are the same. Vertical equity, however, suggests that you need to provide different level of healthcare, reducing health inequities by treating people with different needs differently, proportionate to their needs. So much to think about here. On the one hand, yes, if you are less advantaged, you should be identified and you should be given more services. On the other hand, that leads to targeting, and that leads to poor services for poor people rather than good services for all people. All of these kinds of considerations come out of that. But at the heart of it, this is a principle that is followed very widely now in most public policies. That you need to consider the existing level of social advantage before you implement interventions. Okay, this is everybody knows what this is. What this is. So this is from his book in 2009, Idea of Justice. Principles of justice tend to be anchored to arrangements and rules rather than directly to social realizations and human lives and freedoms. So he's saying it's all written in the books, but it doesn't actually happen. So he's talking about an implementation issue. But what he's saying is that all our understanding of justice tends to be anchored in rules rather than in realities. So instead of that, we need to focus questions of justice on what actually happens in actual lives, rather than merely looking for ideal institutions and arrangements. So in a way, he's advocating for more HPSR. Go out there, find out what's actually happening, and make things better, make things more just as it actually happens in society, not just by creating the ideal set of rules. We are very good at making policies. We've been making policies since independence and before that as well. And some of the policies are excellent. You read them, they are fantastic. But we don't know if they have actually had much impact. They may have had, but they have not had enough. So he suggests that this is a Niti-based focus, whereas he's saying that, I don't know whether this is actually true, I'm not a Sanskrit or Hindi scholar, but he's saying that this is a Niti kind of thinking and this is Nyaya thinking, which is fundamentally different. Okay, so some examples of health being cited as a human right. Health is not cited as a constitutional right in India, we all know that. WHO Constitution says enjoyment of highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being. Okay, so moving on from those philosophies, broad philosophies of justice and equity, There are also some new types of things which are coming out. The whole domain of relational ethics, which has relevance for HPSR, because it speaks to issues around relationships, which we've established are very important in health systems. So how do we treat others, respect and trust? Are intentions important? We brought up the issue of intentions. So there's a field called deontology which touches on that and suggests that yes, actually intentions are important. It's not just the outcomes, but actually what you are aiming to do is actually very important. And processes can be seen as important as outcomes. So that again touches on Amartya Sen, Niti versus Nyaya. So again, there's a lot we could discuss here, but just to give you a quick snapshot that it's not just about the big questions of equity and justice, but sometimes the processes, the relationships, attention to intentions, these things are also required to direct attention. Okay, we're going to close with the group work. So the group work, there are 6 health system problems. I won't read them all right now. This is non-implementation of public health guidelines. This is absenteeism in health facilities. This is unreliability of health data. This is failure of professional self-regulation. This is disproportionate financial allocations for primary and tertiary care. And this one is inability to develop drugs for diseases of the poor. Okay, so 6 fairly simple health system problems. We'll all agree that they are problems. I'm guessing here. Okay, some of you may not agree. Some of you may think professional self-regulation works very well, but I think it's been established in many settings that it doesn't, and it's explained a bit over here. So, can we have do a numbering? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Who's group 1? Please.
So the first question is, are there enough resources to meet the standard treatment protocols, standard public health guidelines and protocols? Then are these standard public health guidelines, are the program officers aware about the guidelines?
What are the reasons behind this problem? Irregular timings and absenteeism by doctors in public health facilities.
So, would you like to comment on the 3 questions then? The first one, what are the reasons behind the problem of irregular timing? For me, this is an incomplete question. It's a good question, but it's incomplete because it needs to specify something a bit more. So, what are the reasons behind service providers being unable to, then you would have the service provider's perspective. Or you could say, what are the systemic reasons behind, the inability of the system to accommodate, punitive action or, monitoring of such things. Then that would be a planner's perspective. So that way, I think the question needed to be fleshed out a bit more.
The question was on unreliable data, and our first option was to actually measure what is the magnitude of the unreliable data and what are the factors that are influencing the unreliable data. When we say factors, we mean, is it sites, is it improper training, or is it, where all other data not coming properly from? Is it improper training? Is there too much workload on the worker? So it's basically a very management or a program perspective or a meso level question, I would say. And
sounds macro to me, no? Magnitude of unreliable data in a country?
Yeah, so from the health information system that we are getting, so from the current, under the current health information system, so when we say under the current system, what we were looking is that whatever system we have implemented, what is the magnitude of unreliable data that we are getting, so cross-checking or validating the data with the help of some methodology.
So the magnitude of unreliable data, you need How do you measure that? I also don't know how you would measure the magnitude of unreliable data.
With the help of maybe doing
Triangulation kind of thing?
Triangulation, or maybe cross-checking the data from the register with the help of with whatever is entered onto the online system.
So that's a particular question, and that can be answered by doing, say, primary research to corroborate the existing. And the second one on the factors requires a completely different methodology. Yeah.
About the non-working or not working to their full capacity or the full capability by the professional regulatory bodies. So we wanted to see the extent of overprescriptions, and we did it at the micro level because we are looking at the individual medical officers and the extent to which they overprescribe things, and so ultimately we will be coming to how the things are. So we are doing it at the micro level, and this is because this is going to be quantitative research conducted through prescription audits, so it will be evaluative, and the perspective can be that of either policymaker or the researcher.
Yeah.
And so quantitative I have already mentioned.
Thanks. It was great. We really got some good insights there, I think. Thank you. So group 5.
There are numerous policy statements at international, at national level. We had even Almata declaration on primary health care. So even after so many years, the allocation of funds to primary health care is still very low, and most of the funds are allocated to tertiary care hospitals in urban areas. So our group, so we developed many questions, but we came to a consensus on 3 questions. So the first one is whether political leaders and policymakers, whether they know about primary health care or whether they know the importance of primary health care. So that is the first question. So this is from researchers' point of view, perspective, and it's an exploratory question. From policymaker perspective, we have a question on do we have information on population needs and resources required at primary, secondary and tertiary care level? From policymaker perspective. Third question at the micro level, do we have assessment on community perception and needs for preventive and curative care?
Okay. I think this group has also got a very difficult question actually, because it's probably a very opaque area for us. Most of us don't know why this happens, and so we can't even conjecture, and so developing the right research questions on that is pretty difficult. But I think you've done a great job, so thanks. And sorry we missed the last one, but I think we need to move on to the last one. And then I have some announcements, and then we'll go break for tea.
Globally widespread deficiency in resource allocation and innovation for development of new medicine, vaccine, medical products for diseases that disproportionately affect developing countries and the poor. Yeah, these were the questions we have found. First is not exactly a question, but to understand the process which is involved in allocating the resources and the development of innovation of new medicines.
I think it's quite different, no? The first is the policy process. The second is to try and, the first one is a exploratory question. Second one is a explanatory question. You're trying to find out what is responsible for uneven resource allocation or inadequate resource allocation. It needs to be more specific, definitely. I think you need to either have a case study, or you need to focus down on to what would be your sort of conceptual framework for understanding these factors. But I think that's still more advanced. So any question which tries to explain in an open-ended way has this problem of non-specificity. So typically you need a conceptual framework to organize those factors, the emerging factors. You need a conceptual framework to chart them out. But that's great. But when we say barriers, it's typically, are they the barriers for the pharmaceutical industry, or are they barriers for governments to fund such research? So I think barriers is you can actually barriers and vested interests are the flip side of the same coin. So for somebody who is primarily interested in their financial, profitability of the venture, the barrier would be non-profitability of the venture. So, and then they will exercise their power to. So that's how actually the perspective can change. Whether you look at it as a barrier issue or whether you look at it as a power issue, that can come from just changing the question a little bit. This is a test which I'd like you to take just to close the day. We haven't really had time to discuss all the readings and all of the discussions, recap the discussions from yesterday, especially from the HSHP capsule. But this is a substitute for that. So please take 5 minutes to respond. It's very quick answers. So according to most popular definitions, policy represents decisions with a blank. Purpose? Okay, I think intention is okay. I don't know. I defer to the other faculty. Do you think intention is okay instead of purpose? According to Nishtar, when a public and private mix of healthcare delivery shows symptoms of compromised quality and equity, it can be diagnosed as having blank. Sorry, we didn't actually discuss. We discussed it very briefly, but not really fair. Anybody? Mixed health systems syndrome, but that's fine. We won't assess you on that. An approach that addresses health system bottlenecks to specific vertical programs while achieving system-wide benefits is a blank approach. Diagonal approach. A contemporary philosopher who decried that principles of justice are often anchored to arrangements and rules rather than directly to social realizations, human lives and freedoms is Amartya Sen. The policy approach with its features starts with a statement of behavior, top down or bottom up. Bottom up. Implementation seen as relationships between actors. Bottom up. Implementation with clear lines of authority and enforcement of norms. Focus on execution of policymakers' intentions. Top down starts with a statement of intent. Top down. Subordinate actors also seen as decision makers. Bottom up. According to Travis, which of the following responses to a given constraint represents a disease-specific response and which is a health system response? Constraint: poorly motivated staff. A. Financial incentives to reward delivery of particular priority services. Disease-specific. B. Institution of proper performance review systems, greater clarity, health systems response. Constraint: weak planning and management. A. Restructuring ministries of health, recruitment and development. Health systems response. And continuous education and training workshops, disease specific response. Researching specific services or disease programs that can be part of the scope of HPSR if they have health system wide effects, or as a blank for understanding systems issues or understanding systemic issues. Anyone? Sorry, you said? As a tracer. Perfect. So I'll take either tracer or case study. As a tool, as a lens is also acceptable. Tool probably not so.
As an entry point.
Entry point is also acceptable. Yeah. Okay. But tracer is a useful term. It's used a lot in HPSR. So just keep it in mind. Okay. Thank you everyone.